to a new episode of the CHGO Fire Podcast presented by Coors Light, the official domestic beer partner of Chicago Fire FC. Chicago, choose chill. Go to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer to get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. I'm your host, Alex Campbell, and first things first, we are only a few days away from the first ever CHGO Fire Takeover presented by our friends at Coors Light as the Chicago Fire take on Inter Miami this Saturday at Soldier Field. We got tickets still available. You get a free CHGO Fire t-shirt with that purchase. We're going to have a tailgate out on the Waldron deck ahead of the game. Go to the events page at allchgo.com for tickets and more info. Hopefully going to see a lot of you all out at that. Looks like it is going to be an absolutely beautiful day out on the lakefront. Kickoff is at 7:30. We'll begin festivities at 5:30. Happy Miami week to you all, and to you, Alex Calabrese, checking in from somewhere in upstate New York, fresh off of taking in the Chicago Fire's 2-2 comeback draw against New York City FC. Alex, thanks for taking a few minutes. Much appreciated.
Yes, hey Alex. Thanks as always for having me on the show. Always happy to be here. And I am here in the state of New York still, but I will see you guys very soon for the Miami game, which I guess we're all very looking forward to, excuse me.
Yeah, a very busy traveling man these days. Also going to be joined later in the show by Paul Tenorio of The Athletic. We're going to talk about the book he's been working on about Lionel Messi's arrival in MLS, as well as his Mauricio Pochettino reporting and whatever else we have time to get into. But first, Chicago Fire 2, NYCFC 2. The Fire left this one late, Alex. Hugo Kuipers gets his 10th MLS goal of the season in the 78th minute. Then we get a stoppage time penalty from Brian Gutierrez. From your view in the stadium, Alex, how did the Fire go from looking just completely miserable for 75 minutes to somehow salvaging a point out of this?
Well, first things first, my view in the stadium was from, it felt like I was in Brooklyn. It's behind home plate and the field is in the outfield. So it was a bit distant, but, it was interesting. I think for those first 75 minutes or so, it just felt like the Fire were completely hopeless. It was going to be one of those games where they were completely flat from start to finish. They were deservedly 2 goals down within 23 minutes. It arguably could have been a lot more by halftime. They held on. Hugo Kuipers pulls something out of his hat that we haven't seen from him, and that's a shot from distance. And then in the 94th minute, after some late momentum, Rafa Schijos tries to send a hopeful ball into the box. It goes off Tavon Gray's arm. Brian Gutierrez steps up, scores his second penalty of the season, and the place was completely silent. And NYCFC were actually booed off the field after the final whistle, which 15 minutes prior, that would have been unfathomable considering the way they were playing and how poor the Fire were for the majority of that game.
For those watching on YouTube, Tavon Gray's arms were kind of like in a he just got scared position. It's just a thing you cannot do defending a cross. He put both his arms up, hits him in the hand. Clear penalty. Guti buries it. 2-2. Yeah, but I think the one thing you got to think of, though, that even though the Fire, Alex, get this draw, the defensive concerns remain. We see Carlos Terán, only fit enough to play 45. He's replaced by Tobias Sahlqvist. Also, getting back to fitness, he plays 45. Suke and Schijos had their rough moments. It kind of feels like the Fire are in this mode where they might just have to try to outscore teams, which this game kind of showed the perils of that.
Yeah, it does feel that way for sure. I know Terán, he did come off injured. He was walking after the game. I believe he was training today as well, so optimistic on that front. But yes, I do think as we approach the end of the season now in MLS, I think there's a good chance that center back is going to be a position. Just the back line in general and the Fire are going to want to strengthen. I thought Tobias Sahlqvist was very good when he came into the game. I do think at this point he's the best defender this team has and should be a starter going forward. He definitely earned the start for this weekend. But other than that, yes, I think defense is an area they're going to want to emphasize going into the offseason. But going forward, there was not too many issues. When the ball did get to the attacking players, they were quite dangerous. Haile Selassie, I thought, was very good before he came out of the game. Hugo Kuipers didn't see that much of the ball, but every time he did have it in a dangerous position, he looked very, very solid. And when he had that one shot, he just blasted it into the top right corner with sheer will. it seemed like at that moment in the game. And Brian Gutierrez, even in a quiet game, still had that moment at the end. And I thought toward the end of that game, he really stepped into that role very well, and ultimately had the equalizing goal.
Kuipers, we've talked about this all season. If he gets the ball, he's going to get chances. He's going to get goals. I think if you put him in a team like, say, the Columbus Crew, I think he's a 20-goal-a-season striker, easy, in a system that creates more chances for its nines. You mentioned defense being, maybe an issue. I guess it's kind of a defensive note that returning to this game, we saw Andrew Gutman make his first start in a very long time. Obviously, he got that injury in the opening minutes of the season in Philly, then was only healthy for what felt like moments before he got hurt again and has been out for quite a while. What did you make of his first start in months? And, maybe notable that Frank Lopez last week ahead of the game kind of put it on the absence of Gutman for maybe why, at least in possession, the team hasn't played as well as he would have hoped this season.
No, definitely. I think going forward, it made the team a lot more dangerous because that's essentially like adding an extra attacker. He's a very good traditional wingback. And when you had right-footed players at the left-back position, you could tell that it was a liability for this team. But other than Gutman, I want to give a special mention to Justin Reynolds because when Gutman couldn't play the full 90 minutes, he had to come off around the 72nd minute, I believe it was. Reynolds came into the game, just his second ever MLS appearance, and this is the first time it's been more than just like a 3-minute cameo. And I thought he was excellent. I thought he came in, made a great impact, and I don't think it's a coincidence that shortly after those substitutions were made, the ball goes in the back of the net and the game completely flipped on its head. So I thought he was great. I thought he made an impact, and maybe going forward, I think he's a player that you're going to see relied upon a lot more at left back, in the full back position, as a backup, even if he's not going to be a starter anytime soon.
So we see the Fire return to action here on the road after a long layoff, having been eliminated from League's Cup in the group stage. 3-game homestand now for the Fire. It's Miami this weekend, followed by DC United and the New York Red Bulls. You're never out of the playoff picture in MLS. So, Alex, I think a big question now is, given this homestand and, how difficult these opponents are, the Fire schedule, you could argue, even though it has more road games, gets easier after that run in terms of the quality of opponents. How many points do you think the Fire need to get out of these next 3 games? Obviously, a draw this weekend against league-leading Miami would be big, but then I think DC United and New York Red Bulls, particularly depending on the health of Emil Forsberg in that Red Bulls game, they're just not the same team without him. It feels like because they're at home, there is that pressure to get something on the board in all these games.
Yeah, I think the Fire have given up so many points at home this season that they really need to get 6 or 7 points from this 3-game stand right here. I mean, definitely there are a lot of opportunities to get points in this run-in. I mean, Montreal away is another game that I think you really have to win the way that they're playing right now. They just lost 5-0 at home to the New England Revolution. So you look at the upcoming schedule, there are plenty of games that the Fire really need to win because they've dropped so many points. It's a pretty weak bottom part of the Eastern Conference, and a lot of teams get into the playoffs. So they're technically still in it, and they probably will be until at least the last 2 or 3 games. But it's really hard to know what's going to be enough because the other results are kind of all over the place. You don't know what you're going to get with a team like New England or Toronto. They could be amazing one day and they could lose 5-0 at home the next game. So we'll see what happens. But I think for these 3 games, Inter Miami is going to be difficult. I think you probably are happy with a tie, but you obviously want to go for the win. DC and New York are 2 games I think you need to win at home, especially DC and Red Bull as well, because that's a team that, yes, they had a really good start to the season, but you also tied them already at their place. So coming back home, you should have that confidence that you can go and go one step further and get 3 points.
In DC, obviously the big threat there, Christian Benteke, that'll be a handful for the Fire defense to handle. We talked about, you said how good Justin Reynolds was in this late cameo, and he was. If Reynolds can prove himself at this level, what do we think? What's Ari Lassiter's place in this? You mentioned Montreal. They've gone full fire sale. They're probably not going to be favored in any of the games they play the rest of the season, even at home against a team like the Fire. They probably won't be picked to win that one. What sense have you gotten, if any, of, I know last week Frank Lopez talked about, he's a guy who can play on that left side, but I'm just not sure where he fits in. If Gutman can stay healthy the rest of the season, Is that the only Justin Reynolds we're going to see, or was there any added sense this weekend as Lassiter was suspended of where he's going to fit into this picture?
I mean, Lassiter, I think it doesn't take anything away and it adds a small boost. The way I see it, he's essentially on an 8-game contract. His Montreal contract was going to expire at the end of the season. The Fire are essentially bringing him in for these last 8 games to have more depth on that left side because Chase Gasper's out. Justin Reynolds, yes, you're still phasing him in. He's still getting used to first-team soccer. I think having Ari Lassiter, especially given Andrew Gutman's inconsistencies with injury this season, you maybe don't want to risk him 90 minutes every game. I think it really benefits to have Lassiter. He's an attacking left wing back as well. If you go to a 4-2-3-1, he's someone who can play on either wing. And I think that's also really helpful considering that the Fire played with a back four at the end of the New York City game. When they came back, it was with a back four on the field, and that worked clearly a lot better than the back three did. So if you're going to stick with that, Lassiter is a natural winger. He can play in those wide positions because when you look at this roster right now, the only natural, reliable winger that this team has is Marin Haile Selassie. Chris Miller has been inconsistent and unreliable. And Brian Gutierrez was out of position on the wing there. So I think it really benefits to have that winger option if you want to play with a 4-2-3-1.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, before we get you out of here, Alex, Miami this weekend. Fire, of course, last year, Messi didn't show up, and the Fire ran away as 4-1 winners with one of, if not their best performance of the season. Obviously, we're in a different place now with the extra reinforcements Miami has this season. I guess, Fire fans, I think, have some really melancholy feelings right now about this game in terms of, they feel like they've gotten screwed a bit again in Messi's absence. Obviously, it's not going to be the 62,000 fans we saw last year. When you're talking to Fire fans, what do you think their attitude should be going to this weekend? How do you spin this one a bit? The combo of, sure, Messi's not here, but every game's important, and also it's not like this Miami team coming in is the shell of themselves we saw a year ago.
Right. I mean, the way I see it, it's like, yes, you're not going to get to see Messi play. If you're a soccer fan, if you're just a general sports fan, you're maybe disappointed that you're not going to see Messi play. At the same time, you're going to see Luis Suarez and you're going to see Sergio Busquets, two of the best players of this generation that are being forced to share the spotlight. At any other MLS team, they would be the main attraction, not quite to the level of Messi, but at a level that no other player in MLS has. So if you're just a soccer fan and you're disappointed to not see Messi, I think it's great that you're going to see Suarez and Busquets as well. And I think Jordi Alba is going to be available this time around as well. So there's that. I think for a Fire fan, this is still a big game. You're still in the playoff race, as ridiculous as it may seem. That result at New York City gives confidence to this group that maybe they can make a push here at the end. And the schedule is manageable here. The most difficult part of the schedule is going to be passed after this game. So I think it's still a big game with big stakes, just like it was last year. It's not quite as deep into the season as it was last year, but if you win this game, the Fire are very much in the playoff race. I think it might even put them into a playoff position at the end of the weekend. So given the stakes, given that there's going to be a big crowd, given that there is still going to be a lot of star power on the field in this game, I think it's still a very, very attractive fixture for everybody, for Fire fans, for soccer fans, for anyone who's just interested in the spectacle. I think it'll still be worth it.
Well, Alex, we'll see you out there. Safe travels, of course, and who knows, maybe despite all the star power, the Fire can pull another surprise, and if they get a win, hopefully FC Cincinnati sends like an edible arrangement or something, because it would be a big boost to them in their Shield hopes. Alex, great talking to you as always. Like I said, safe travels. When we'll see you out at Soldier Field this weekend.
Awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you and everybody there.
All right, up next, we're going to be talking to Paul Tenorio from The Athletic, but first, a quick word from a few of the folks who make this show possible. CHGO Fire is, of course, presented by Coors Light. There's so much that can stress you out, and man, there's so many moments you might need to choose to chill, especially this week. Heat index this week in Chicago, over 100 degrees, and that's on top of everything else that's going on in life, work, social media, all the other little things that might build up. Just another reason to choose chill, and when you choose to chill, that's the perfect time to reach for an ice cold Coors Light. When the mountains on Coors Light turn blue, it is as cold as the Rockies. It is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. That's what we're going to be doing at the Takeover this weekend. Pre-game Coors Light helping us out with the tailgate, helping you and everyone there chill ahead of the big match in the warm summer sun against Inter Miami. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment that is crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. So make the most of the times you choose to chill and choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. CHGO Fire is also brought to you by Shady Rays. Summer is not over yet. The weather this week is a reminder of that, even though school is back in session. And our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with all your remaining summer adventures with premium polarized shades that won't break the bank. Shady Rays is an independent company offering a world-class product with over 300,000 people having rated them 5 stars. Their shades are durable. The optics are crystal clear. They are the perfect choice for anything you are doing outdoors with hundreds of options and styles to choose from. Whether you're looking for a specific style, something in your team's colors, they have you covered. I love my Shady Rays. I especially loved taking advantage of their lost or replacement guarantee, in which a pair I'd owned for over 2 years broke, and for less than $20, within 2 weeks, I had a brand new pair of Shady Rays on my doorstep. So if your shades ever go missing or take an unexpected hit, it's really the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Also, if you don't love your shades, you can exchange them for a new pair or return them worry-free within the first 30 days. There is no risk when you shop at Shady Rays. Their team always has your back with personal and fast support. Exclusively for CHGO listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to ShadyRays.com and use code CHGO for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades, rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, talked online today. How was the big show? We had 2 guests today, and we now welcome in the second of those guests, a Chicago local himself, Paul Tenorio of The Athletic, recently coming off of book leave. So, Paul, I appreciate you taking the time and hopping here on CHGO Fire. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Hey, man, you killed those ad reads. I was always so bad at those for allocation disorder. Stay School would just give me such a hard time, and I had to let him take those ad reads over. So I appreciate the work on those things, man.
Well, you can also appreciate back in those days of the allocation disorder days, doing it all live is a little different than the fancy stuff you guys have over at The Athletic, where you can just throw to those pre-recorded ad breaks and do a few of those if you need to do them.
Super fancy at the Athletic. The allocation disorder, that's what we were known for, is the fancy way that we recorded things late at night with maybe occasional glass of whiskey, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. How the times change, though, as a former loyal allocation disorder listener, do miss it from time to time. But we're here to talk about what's going on right now. Paul, I think I got to start with the book. Obviously, I mentioned you were just coming off a book leave. The Messi effect is, at least in the press releases I've seen, the working title of what you've been working on. You've obviously, you've been in this business a long time. How would you describe how the experience has been, how it's been different, anything surprising, just what it's been like to be almost entirely dedicating your time to this one big project over such a long period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different for sure. And I think more challenging than anything I've done in the past, because usually, you have one story, you're focusing on it for a week or two, maybe a month if it's a big piece, and kind of reporting on it. And usually I know like where it's starting, where it's finishing, and I'm able to build the structure pretty quickly and understand where I want to go with it. With this book, it's a little bit different. I mean, it's a lot different, actually. There are multiple angles to this book, about the growth of the sport in this country, the impact of Messi's arrival at a time of growth for the sport that is unprecedented, really, right? You have the World Cup coming in 2026, the Copa America that came this past summer, the Club World Cup next summer, the Apple deal, the relevant lawsuit, all these different elements that are going to impact what the sport looks like in the United States going forward. And all of it is unfolding as we speak. So, I'm reporting things in real time while also trying to write the book in real time. And that's not easy. It's been a challenge. Sometimes it's been a fun challenge. Sometimes it's not been a fun challenge. But certainly, I think, it's a really interesting story to tell. I've found some interesting elements as I've been reporting and as I've been writing. It's not just about Messi. I want to make that clear. It really is about the sport in this country and where the league is going, where the sport is going. What are all these different things that are influencing the discussions at the highest level of the game, the board level in MLS, and I think through the kind of executive levels of the sport, outside of the league as well, outside of MLS as well. So it's definitely been challenging, but I'm enjoying it. I'm trying to attack it as best I can, and like I said, there's a real interesting element here of reporting and writing a book at the same time that a lot of the things I'm talking about and reporting on are kind of still evolving as I'm writing.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask, I don't want you to spoil anything in terms of the outlay of the book, but how do you make that decision of when you cut it off, when you say, this is my end point, this is where we're going to leave this story off, even though it is a constantly changing and evolving thing, to your point, as we go forward toward 2026?
Yeah, that's tough to say. I think some of that depends on kind of what happens in the coming months. But I'm aware that I'm not going to be able to tie this book in a bow neatly, because things are changing, and I'm going to file this book next spring, early summer, and it's going to come out the summer after that, or probably April, May of 2026, ahead of the World Cup. And there could be a lot that happens between when I send in the final manuscript, and when the book comes out. That being said, that's not too different. If you go pick up the Beckham Experiment, Grant Wall wasn't able to tie that in a bow either. He wrote that the Beckham Experiment, or he kind of wrote it towards it being a failure. Beckham would go on to win 2 MLS Cups with the Galaxy. The DP rule changed MLS forever. I always cite as an example that Grant gave an interview with the New York Times when the book was coming out, where he said the DP rule was kind of leaning towards not working, that a lot of the teams in the league weren't using the DP rule and didn't feel like it was the right path for MLS. That obviously changed dramatically, right? It became a transformative rule for Major League Soccer. So I have to be careful. I don't want to draw conclusions that are too strong one way or the other. But I think it's important to provide the context of why these things all matter and what are the things that are impacting the direction of this league. And also, how did we get to this point, right? The growth of the sport to this point informs the path forward as well. And the way that the league and the sport have kind of headed, why they've headed that way. The success of the Premier League on television, the growth and accessibility of the game, the globalization of the sport, the growth of Major League Soccer and its decision to kind of grow the infrastructure, the stadiums, the training facilities, and create a level of permanence. The change of the ownership structure in MLS, the number of owners who have come in, who are some of the wealthiest owners of pro sports teams in the world. All of those things have already happened, and I can go through all of those things and lay it out and say this is how we headed this way. So if you read a book like I have the club here next to me on my desk, that kind of speak to the growth of a league, or in my case, the growth of a sport. I think you try to combine some elements of that type of storytelling as well. I'm hoping that maybe, you hope that it'd be amazing if MLS came out in January or February of next year and said, we made these massive changes to the league and this is how we're going to redo MLS going forward. That would be the natural point to be okay, boom, that's the end of the book. But I don't anticipate that happening, and I certainly can't count on it for the purposes of writing this book.
Yeah, so you're saying that the option to have 4 under-22 players isn't exactly the watershed, earth-shattering moment that presents a nice bow. I think you also make a good point, though. You mentioned, obviously, the Beckham Experiment, the club, all of those. There's kind of that whole genre of books, specifically in soccer, that are very much a point in time thing. And I know Grant was always very honest about that this changed a lot, that obviously it became a different world. And I think anybody who writes any of these books, like what you're undertaking right now, has to, I think it's everybody who's reading it also, I think, kind of has that understanding that this is a point in time and we'll see where it goes. I mentioned you're just coming off of the book leave back into ostensibly your normal day-to-day job. But you did have a quite splashy return in terms of the reporting beat a couple weeks ago, because you were the first person I saw put out the information that Mauricio Pochettino was going to be, was at that point the top choice for the U.S. men's national team, for U.S. soccer, to make him the next head coach. A week later, your athletic colleague David Ornstein had the report that terms had been agreed. Again, don't need you to give up any, industry secrets here, but in terms of when that reporting was coming together, what's been your impression of why a coach like Pochettino, who presumably could sit around and wait for somebody to get fired at a top European job? I understand why U.S. soccer would want Mauricio Pochettino, but I think a lot of people are wondering, what does Mauricio Pochettino want this job for? And does it tie into this idea of how soccer's changing in America?
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, look, I think it speaks to the value proposition that exists in the 2026 World Cup. To have all of the eyes of the sport here in the United States, the biggest commercial market in the world, and an untapped market, or not, I don't want to say an untapped market, but a market that hasn't reached its full potential, a market that's still growing. People around the world recognize that there is a huge audience here, and one that is growing every single day. And I think Mauricio Pochettino is another example of that. He understands that there's value in taking over the U.S. men's national team that I think could keep him in the spotlight and actually grow his profile globally, certainly in the United States. And let's examine the situation with this U.S. team. They are a young group still. They have a lot of potential. A lot of people feel like they have more potential than any U.S. group before them. I think that's true. The question is whether they live up to that potential. That's the hard part of this cycle. That's the task that Pochettino's taking on. But the downside's not huge for him. I mean, if you get out of the group and if you win a knockout game, you're putting yourself in kind of the history books for U.S. soccer, right? You reach a quarterfinal, you've matched the best that any U.S. men's national team has ever done before, right? So that's the upside there. And the downside for him isn't huge. Again, you're taking over a high profile job. There are no huge expectations around this team, and your success at the club level speaks for itself. I think if a job opens up in 2 years, he's going to be another top candidate for that job, whether it's Manchester United or Barcelona, Real Madrid. I don't think that part of his profile and his success is going anywhere. So I think it's kind of a win-win opportunity for him, a chance also for U.S. soccer and Pochettino to reach out to a massive Hispanic demographic in this country that tunes into games on prior on Univision. Now I think it's Telemundo going forward. And I think to really introduce himself to kind of the casual soccer fan here in the United States that really only follows a couple big things: the U.S. men's national team and women's national team in major tournaments, maybe the big games, Champions League otherwise, but that will kind of get introduced to this coach who's had decent success in Europe.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of the kind of analysis I've heard, that the Southampton and Tottenham periods of Pochettino are probably more analogous to this job than, Chelsea or certainly that PSG team, where he had the unenviable task of trying to build a defense with Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar ahead of them. But yeah, I think it is going to be just really fascinating to see. I think it's easy to forget how young this team still is. They were, I think, what were they, technically the second youngest team at the World Cup in 2022, only not the youngest because some team brought like a 17-year-old goalkeeper as like their third goalkeeper or something. So yeah, I think it's an exciting proposition, and I hope it's the sort of thing that, brings a few more people into the fold in terms of eyeballs. You also mentioned, and I think this is a big deal, obviously English is not his first language, but the ability to speak both in English and in Spanish to that audience. I agree that that's a really, really huge point. We've got more coming up here with Paul Tenorio of The Athletic, but we've got to take one more quick break first to thank a few people who make CHGO Fire what it is. CHGO Fire is brought to you by Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, your home for judgment-free shopping. A place where all kinds of visitors are welcome to explore, discover, and purchase their wide array of high-quality products. Sunnyside has everything you need to elevate your summer. It is a one-stop shop for all of your cannabis needs with their expertly curated menu, over 100 strains to choose from, and an easy online ordering and in-store pickup process. Their staff is so helpful in store, especially if you're somebody who's just starting out and you're not really familiar with the experience. They are there to answer all your questions, and that online ordering process is seamless as well. Sunnyside is Illinois' favorite dispensary with locations here in the city, including in Wrigleyville and River North, and also across the suburbs and across the state. If you're somebody who's just starting out, their expert guidance can lead you to brands they know you'll love, like Good News and Mindy's, or if you're a pro, there is that big menu with over 100 strains. It is constantly changing every week. They know you'll love brands like Cresco and Florical, who have incredible quality and consistent products to choose from. Here for the summer is Good News Tea Time Disposable Vape, bringing classic lemonade flavor that's perfect for the golf course, because we all need a little help staying loose out on the green. A quick shout out to everybody who came out to our CHGO Kickoff Classic last weekend. I know there were plenty of folks having a good time out there. Visit sunnyside.shop for bright buys every day, including 50% off your first 3 online purchases. Enter promo code HICHGO at checkout to qualify. Exclusions apply. Sunnyside Cannabis Dispensary, bright buys every day, only for 21 and over or Illinois medical card holders. And then one more time, got to plug it again, the first ever CHGO Fire Takeover is this Saturday at Soldier Field, kicking things off in the parking lot with a tailgate at 5:30. Brought to you by our wonderful friends at Coors Light. We've got a block of tickets. Stuff is still available. Still got seats free. Every ticket comes with a free CHGO Fire t-shirt, which, in my very biased opinion, is one of the best things we've got in the CHGO locker. Head to allchgo.com/events and check out all of that. We've got a whole bunch more there as well. Both the White Sox and Cubs crews have events remaining this season. And there is so much happening in Bears world, from the upcoming trip to London and much, much more. The best tailgate in the city for Chicago Bears games is coming back this fall as well. So keep an eye out for all of that. All right, Paul, I do want to talk at least a little bit of MLS with you. First, we got to start with, the local angle here in the Chicago Fire. Obviously, it was a newsy transfer window for them in the summer, not with incomings, but with outgoings. I'm just curious, again, as somebody who's been a close observer of this team for a long time, what was your reaction to the barrage we got a couple weeks ago with Georg Heitz's departure, quickly followed by that of Xherdan Shaqiri?
I think it's an incredible opportunity for the Chicago Fire to hit the reset button and to get things right. If you speak to people around the club, Georg Heitz is very widely respected in that building, really well liked. Mm-hmm. I think somebody that a lot of people enjoyed working with. And I think it speaks to his character that he's walking away at this point, to go home, to be closer to family. And I think there's probably an understanding too of give this team a chance to hit that reset button and to understand that, hey, this is a good moment potentially to have a change in leadership because of the roster turnover that's coming. You have Shaqiri now who's gone. You're going to have Gaston Jimenez, who I think is going to be easily bought down. He's got another year in his contract, but easily bought down. You're out of contract with Chihos. In other words, numerous big money contracts that are coming off the books, 2 DP spots open, the potential to rebuild this team. And I think if you look at the LA Galaxy, that's probably the best example of how quickly you can turn things around in Major League Soccer, and with just a couple moves. And granted, those couple moves cost $20 million plus in transfer fees.
Right.
But they went out and got 2 DPs, 2 wingers that could change the game. And they went from being a bad team outside of the playoffs looking in to a team that's fighting for a supporter shield this year. And I think very similar dynamics. They had a striker who was dependent on service, who didn't have wingers to give service. They went and got 2 wingers, and now they're a complete forward attacking line, and everyone's thriving. Similar situation here. You've got a DP striker who, is going to depend on service more often than not going to create his own goals. Didn't have wingers that could create those opportunities for him. Didn't really have a number 10 that's going to create those opportunities for him. Go out and get 2 DP wingers. But, now you have a chance to have somebody new coming in with a new vision and is saying, okay, I'm going to rebuild this. I hope that they learn from the mistakes in the past. I think they will. You hope that they will. And there are some quality sporting director candidates out there in Major League Soccer that I think could be really effective with Chicago. It's just a matter of whether or not it depends. I think really on how aggressive the Fire are in this search for a sporting director.
Yeah, I think because the sporting director seems to be the more opaque question, because fans in particular go to the coaching search first, even though that's probably got to be the second to hire. You mentioned this is a big opportunity. Of course, the first name everybody brings up, because he only lives a couple miles from here and he's available, is Greg Berhalter. What do you think of that idea? Do you think this is an opportunity that's enticing enough to get somebody like him, who's only been out of work for a couple of months at this point, to seriously consider it?
Well, Greg Berhalter is a coach, not a sporting director. So, I think the Fire need to focus on hiring a sporting director. Joe Mansueto has a track record. He doesn't want somebody who's going to do two jobs. And I don't know if Greg Berhalter would want to stay in MLS to be a sporting director, to not be a sporting director and head coach. We'll see. I mean, look, I think, Greg Berhalter is certainly a candidate for a lot of MLS teams. I think he has the luxury of waiting things out until the end of the season. That would also allow him to potentially get a job in Europe if one opens up as the course of the season starts and that cycle starts to turn and coaches get fired in Europe. Is there a job that opens up for him there before he looks to a job in Major League Soccer? But I think the focus needs to be on who is the sporting director going to be for the Chicago Fire. I don't think it's going to be Greg Berhalter. I don't see him being just a sporting director. And so, and I know people have thrown it out because it seems very convenient and because he was the sporting director and coach in Columbus. I just don't see him as a candidate for this job necessarily. But I think there are some interesting candidates out there. Ned Grabavoy in Portland, he's the sporting director there. He's local to Chicago. I think he's done a really good job turning things over in Portland. I think there's value to be had in hiring somebody who's from the area, who has roots here, who wants to put his own roots down here potentially because he's from here, and has a buy-in to helping the Chicago Fire turn around. And that's a real thing. Like, I live in the Chicago market. I want the Fire to do well. I want to be able to go out to Soldier Field and watch games and enjoy them from the press box. And I think people who are from markets have a little bit more of that connection to a team. I felt the same way the last time a job was open in Chicago, and I thought the Fire should have chased Garth Lagerwey, another guy who's local to the area. There's an interesting thing here with Chicago. They have guys in the league who are successful at their jobs doing this. You had Garth Lagerwey. You have Ned Grabavoy. I think Mikey Stevens has done a really nice job in LA as the director of scouting for the Galaxy, now moved up to assistant GM. All of them are Chicago guys. And I think there is something interesting there. Of course, there are other candidates. If you're going for guys who have been number ones, who are more experienced, do you go chase a guy like, I don't know, Chris Henderson in Miami? Obviously, there's been a lot of change there. Do you go after someone like Porrick Smith in Colorado, Ernst Tanner in Philadelphia? How aggressive do you want to be if you're the Chicago Fire? Are you going to chase somebody who is a number one at another team where there might have to be some levels of compensation? I think the Fire should. I think they should go after those types of names. And, I also feel like going and getting somebody local would be a really cool story for the Fire, something that they could help to sell, which I think the Fire need to do as well. But they're not just selling, a name that's local. It's somebody who's been successful in the league before as well. So some interesting candidates out there for sure for the Chicago Fire.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the Grabavoy angle. Again, it's kind of like a redo of Garth Lagerwey, the experienced local coming from the Cascadia region who might be available. I think Ernst Tanner is an interesting shout too, because it does feel like Philadelphia has come to a bit of an end in that cycle, and maybe this is the time. And you mentioned Chicago connections. Once they get to the coach, it seems like everybody from that early era of the Chicago Fire is a head coach somewhere in the soccer world. So if they want to stay local, they certainly don't have a shortage of options there. Given that we're talking MLS, Paul, though, before I let you go, I think we do have to touch on the story that is Greg Berhalter's former team. You mentioned them, the Columbus Crew. They win another trophy over the weekend. They beat LAFC in the final of Leagues Cup. You talk about roster builds, and obviously Tim Bezbatchenko no longer in Columbus, but he was instrumental to that. You probably can't replicate the job that Wilfried Nancy has done, but when you look at the league, and again, you've been thinking a lot about how it's changing how things are growing in American soccer. What do you think the kind of the top line takeaway or takeaways are that everybody else should be learning from what's been going on in Columbus these last 18 months?
Well, I mean, look, I think Columbus is a great story because ownership invested, a new owner came in, they invested real money into that team, built a new stadium, bought DPs at a level that they had never bought DPs in that market before. And we can talk a lot about Wilfried Nancy, and I think he is a really interesting case study for Major League Soccer. Potentially, he could be, I think, the first coach who gets a job in Europe based solely on what he's done in MLS as a coach. I don't think that's ever happened before. Maybe someone that's watching could correct me. But everyone else left who has left to go to bigger jobs either was known before for as a player or as a coach, or went on to a national team job before they stepped up, or else were inside of kind of a multi-club system and used that to kind of move up the ranks. So I think there's the fact that they had the best GM in the league at the time, Tim Bezbatchenko, the best coach in the league in Wilfried Nancy. And for that reason, I don't think we talk enough about Cucho Hernandez. I mean, the simple fact is MLS is a very easy and simple league when we talk about teams that are successful, typically. Like, if you look at the teams that win, they spend well on their DPs. And if you do that, you're going to win. And I don't think anyone could argue that Columbus has spent well on DPs. Cucho Hernandez is a game changer for them. Darlington Nagbe, a lower paid DP, one of the best players, I think, in league history, pure soccer players, a very, very good player. Rossi, they knew was going to be successful in MLS based on what he had done at LAFC. And you go back in the history of this league, and that's proven to be true. I mean, we talk about LAFC and the success they've had, even though they haven't won these finals. They've been there. They won an MLS Cup. They've continued to sustain that roster. They've gotten their DPs right. Toronto FC, Seattle Sounders. These are all teams who are winning championships based on their DPs. Miami, winning right now. DPs, Leo Messi. LA Galaxy, we just talked about it. Their DPs, they're winning. So, that's kind of the way things have worked. And I know we see these little spikes from teams that don't spend, that have a couple years of success and then fade away. We're seeing that, I think Philly is an example of that. They're kind of coming to an end of a cycle. It's hard to sustain. You've got to hit on so many different signings and then hope that they sustain. And then you have to figure out a way to give them all raises while staying cap compliant. It's not an easy task. So you give credit to Philadelphia that's done it. Colorado has done it in the past. It looks like maybe catching a little bit of that wind potentially again. Salt Lake. I mean, the league is designed to allow teams not to spend and to stay competitive. And you have a playoff system where pretty much everyone gets in, and the playoffs are a crapshoot. It's one and done. Anyone can win. But I think the league right now, because of the way the pay structure is set up, how inefficient it is, you just have to get your DPs right. Columbus has done that. It's no surprise to me that they've done that because of who they had building the roster. But I think also you take that and you add in a really good coach who's made kind of the depth guys on the team perform better than they normally would. And you have one of the most dominant teams in Major League Soccer history. And that's the story, right? It's like hit on your DPs and get higher than average performance out of your depth, and you're going to be competitive in MLS. And I think Columbus, is a really, really, really good team. And I'm happy to see it. I hope they keep winning. I think it's really important for MLS to have some of these teams that sustain success over time that people can start to not like. You want to have the Yankees, you want to have the Bulls of the 90s, you want to have the Cowboys of the 90s, these teams that other teams in the league grow to hate because they're winning. I want to see LAFC doing well, Columbus doing well, just like Toronto and Seattle were dominant, and to try to push these other teams to spend more, spend better, spend smarter, and maybe to push the league to say, okay, like we need to grow as well and grow the quality in our league, and we're going to change the way we think about spending.
Right. Well, hey, on the Nancy point to him potentially going to Europe, his old boss Bezbatchenko is now involved in the company that owns, among other things, Crystal Palace, and things have started very poorly there. And they do have a history of
Bournemouth.
Bournemouth. That's my mistake. So no, that's not coming open anytime soon. But they do have. He's got those connections now in that international.
Listen, he's definitely there. I think there are people that are aware, for sure. From what I've heard, the whispers I've heard, he's not a stranger anymore to people that are starting to look and use analytics to look for coaches that stand out around the world. He certainly is making a play to be known in leagues in Europe for sure.
Yeah, and it's probably not to his advantage that, again, as a guy who's fluent in French, it's probably not to his advantage that nobody in France has any money right now, so there was never going to probably be a chance for somebody to buy out his contract. Real quick, Paul, one last thing. Not a specific prediction, should we say, but when you look at these teams in MLS right now, Columbus coming off a trophy, Miami still at the top of the table, Cincy looking strong but fading a little. Do you think there's a team that stands out as who should be backed most to win a trophy this year, whether it's the Shield, whether it's MLS Cup? Is it still Columbus until somebody proves otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Again, it's so hard to tell. Playoffs are such a crapshoot. It's about who's healthy at that point in time, who's playing well. I don't think it's the smartest thing in the world to bet against Messi in knockout games. I just don't think that goes well for you most of the time. I guess CONCACAF Champions League would be the exception to that recently. But I think if Messi comes back healthy for the end of the year, which I expect him to do, I think they're going to be a really tough out. They're going to be a really tough out in the playoffs. I'm excited to see it. I want to see higher level games like we saw with LAFC against Columbus. I hope we see those types of games with the Galaxy, with LAFC, as teams kind of get better, get rolling. Portland's played really well over the second half plus of the season. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm going to back Miami for now as long as Messi's on the field in the playoffs.
Yeah, that does seem like the point. They're going to get him enough minutes at the end of the year to get him fresh, get him match fit. And then, yeah, to your point, Messi in a knockout format, I think he's shown enough recently that that's not anyone to bet against. And, for the craziness of the MLS playoff picture, who knows? Maybe even the Chicago Fire could still find their way in there to participate, if nothing else. Well, Paul Tenorio of The Athletic, really appreciate you taking the time coming on CHGO Fire. Hopefully see you out there for the Traveling Circus this weekend. Thanks for taking the time, and hopefully talk to you again here on the podcast sometime soon.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That is going to do it for this episode of CHGO Fire. Again, hope to see everybody listening out at Soldier Field for the takeover this weekend. Should be a really fun time. For now, I'm Alex Campbell. This has been CHGO Fire, and I'll talk to you next time.